So this was sent to me, and they were like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, Jesus is not in the Old Testament, but I'll look and see what's going on, and then we'll get back to the Bible, and I'll get back to you, right?" And I thought it was interesting because they're gonna be slick. The caller calls in, and they're talking to this guy, and the reason I recognize him, he's from that channel on YouTube where he talks to that the guy in Poland who debunks Islam and strips Islam down to its bears. He just debunks it. He's really good. And they're really hammering out Islam over there in Europe because of the immigration that's been going on. And I'm wondering how long until that flips over here, because there's a pattern. Whatever goes on specifically in England ends up happening over here. But I mean, we know it's because we're still controlled by Britain. You know, I mean, even the Navy still flies the Jacobite flag. We'll look up the flag. I don't think it's the Jack. I forget. It's not the Union Jack, but they fly the flag that represents the Jacobites or something like that. So we'll see if this will allow. I don't know how I'm going to do this because there's music in the background. The music in the background, I always get flagged. Copyright, copyright. Even though I'm not making any money off this stuff. You know, I don't get famous off this stuff. I'm just sharing my thoughts and what I see, but it doesn't matter. Let's see. This guy says, whoever put this video up, put Jesus in the Old Testament. No, he's not. All right. So let's see.
Son.
Who told you there's no mention? You want me to give you a mention? I can give it to you. Here, Proverbs 30, verses 3 and 4. Hold
Proverbs 30.
Proverbs 30.
You're telling me the Son is mentioned.
Yes.
The Son.
I'm about to read it if you let me. Yeah.
Is mentioned
See,
in the Old.
who called in was trying to make an argument, failed because they keep saying the Son. They don't specifically say Jesus is mentioned in the Old Testament. Whoever put this video up says, "Oh, it's Jesus." They're talking about the Son, and as we've learned from Lexwill, the Son, and the sons are the fallen. I said the fallen. Are the angels collectively? Okay.
Yes, Proverbs 30, verses 3 and 4. You ready so I can read it?
But don't play no games.
I gave you the verses. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 3 and 4. What games? Let me read it. I'll give you the link to the Hebrew. Here. I neither learn wisdom, nor have knowledge of the Kadoshim. Kadoshim is plural of Kadosh, holy ones. I don't have knowledge of the holy ones, meaning these holy ones are beyond my ability to understand. Now watch this. Who has ascended?
Who has gone up to heaven and come down?
Yes.
Whose hands have gathered up the wind?
Go ahead.
The Creator.
Who has wrapped up the waters in a cloak?
Keep going.
Who has established all the ends of the earth?
The Creator.
What is his name? And what is the name of his son?
Bam!
Whoa. All right, let's stop there. Because that's where they're like, "Oh, we got you." So let's pop over here to the Blue Letter Bible. And I want to start with verse 1 because for some reason they leave out verse 1, which I think verse 1 was more interesting. It was the most interesting part about all this. Let's open it up. Because I thought this was interesting. I've never seen this thing before. The words of anguish, the son of... Here we go. I'm going to go down here. Let's read this. All right.
Yake, yorke, from an unused root probably meaning to obey, obedient, Jacka, a symbolical name for Solomon, Jacka.
See, I had no idea Solomon had another name. And that's like, I was like, we should dig into that name, you know, in spare time. Obviously, it's not dire importance, but just because whenever you search for Solomon, you get nothing. Nothing. You get a whole bunch of Freemason stuff. Oh, Solomon means this and Solomon means that. And it's like, come on, man. Why is it so hard to find anything about this man? But you have an island where it looks like his people were marooned there. So let's see here. I want to get back to the verse, right? Now it says in 30. Okay. See. Who hath ascended up into the heavens and descended the Most High? I think of the stories where he came to meet Abraham, right? And he was the one that fought with Jacob. You know, I was going into that. I was looking into, I don't know what it was. Oh no, yes it was. I was looking for baby names, and I was reading through the Old Testament to see, you know, the real names of people, and I was going over Jacob, and I was reading about how he wrestled with the stranger, and you know, I mean, it'd be better if I pull up the verse so you can see it, but I believe he fought with the Most High. He wrestled with the Most High. He named the place after God's face or something like that, where he wrestled him. So he was the one that comes up and down, and you know, who has gathered the winds in his fist? Who hath bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? See, this is the Most High. What is his name? Thanks to Lex, we were set straight. Exodus 3:14. Who shall I tell him sent me? I am that I am. Why would you put the definition in there? Lex was like, hey, it's a riddle. He showed us. It's not. It wasn't I am that I am. That's the meaning of the name. It was Haya Haya. Bam. So his name, Haya Haya. Right? What is his son's name? Meaning more than one. There it goes. There it is. Now, it's a translation they were using where they drop the S and they make it seem there's just one son. But here you have it. If thou canst tell. Well, I mean, I don't worship the angels. I don't study the angels. The only angel I'm familiar with, you know, that is good for us is Michael. And that's really all I care about. I mean, it's weird because, I mean, Arthur and I were just going over this with Daniel and the messenger being delayed and the different Elohims, right? The different gods set up over all the nations and the friction and fight that's among them. But I just wanted to do a video on that because I knew I was going to forget. I knew I was going to forget this. So I want to get into the next thing. And I've been sitting on this for a few weeks because I wanted to calm down. Because when I seen this, I was jumping around because I was jumping around. Like I was so I stopped the video. I couldn't watch the rest of the video. I have since then. I think it was like 4 days ago. I finished watching the video, but I was so excited. And it was just amazing because it was like I was working on a puzzle, and one of the pieces of the puzzle I couldn't figure out how it fit. And in Lexwill's video, he answered it. And I want to show you because I thought this was crazy. And it was great. Here we are. So when I did my ancestry DNA test a while back, they said that I was 84% Nigerian. And my sister and I, we were going through our family's genealogy, and she's done the large work gathering information and stuff like that and finding out, you know, the connections. And we couldn't find the slave connection, right? No slave ships, no slaves. And we're like, okay, so something's wrong with this. We was easier to do our dad's side only because our grandmother is still alive, and our dad's still alive too. But our grandmother, you know, she got a lot of answers out of her whenever we came across different individuals. And of course, we asked that question, you know, is there any Indians in our family? And she's like, yeah, your grandfather said he was Choctaw. And that's what we were finding on the records. Because we were finding that, and we wanted to ask her, before we were like, yeah, that's what we are. That's what we were connected to, and we go by the father's lineage. You are who your father is. Our mother's side's hard because it's so mixed in like betrayal and forbidden love stories and stuff like that. I don't know how that's the best way to put it, because I'm not trying to trash. And our mother just doesn't want to really go into that because I guess it hurts to talk about it. So we're doing a lot of this stuff based on our dad and our dad's side. And that's where we were able to find, there's me, there's my dad, there's his dad, and then there's our first grandfather who's on the dolls rolls, right? And then there's 3 other grandfathers. And that's as far as we were able to go as far as that goes, as far as the male line on our dad's side. Our grandmother on her dad's side, that was the interesting one, right? Because her bloodline goes from Georgia to the Carolinas. Now, they say the Carolinas, but we found it's South Carolina. And from there, that family came over from Jamaica. And I wasn't able to find that bloodline on any of the, any of the records on Ancestry. But what I did was I actually found them by taking my grandfather's name on our grandmother's side to the University of Florida and went to their, I forget the name of the records they have for Jamaica, but we found his father, right? They came to South Carolina, right? Francis Pugh came to South Carolina with 9 slaves. Now, we were like, oh, this is embarrassing, just because, what we were always taught about slavery and who the slaves were and stuff like that. And we were talking to some of our cousins that we were connecting to on Ancestry from Atlanta, and they were telling us, yeah, there's a grave in North Carolina where the Pews are buried. One half are the wealthy Pews, the other half are the not so wealthy Pews. So it answered our question right there. Yeah, these were melanated people who brought melanated people to South Carolina as slaves, right? And they're buried in the same graveyard. Because there was no doubt that, they were like, yeah, it wasn't white folks. They brought over other melanated people. And, and the family knows about it. And it's an ugly, something they look down, the wealthy Pews that are still alive still look down on the other side of the pews because they're family, but they don't like them, is what we were told. So we were still stumped. How did we have Nigerian if he's coming from Jamaica? And this was the thing. We found someone whose name was Pugh, born the same year as Francis Pugh, but his name wasn't Francis. And he was supposed to have come from Britain to Jamaica, and from Jamaica, he came to South Carolina, but he didn't bring slaves. So that's where we've been stumped, trying to figure out, okay, how did you get from Jamaica then? And where did you get the wealth to purchase slaves in Jamaica and bring them to South Carolina? And the last I looked into it, I was listening to Dane Calloway and the African guy he brought on. And they were talking about, how they know the stories that they were told is not true about the slave trades from their perspective. And Dane Calloway was breaking down that England owns Nigeria. I want to say it was England or Britain, one of the two. They own Nigeria, then they found it and set it up. So we're like, okay, we are still connected to Great Britain somehow, even if we are Nigerians from over there. Now, what I showed was just, man, it blew my mind. All right, watch this.
To make their land desolate and a perpetual hissing, everyone hath passed it by shall be astonished and wag his head, and that shake its head, right? To wander, to flee, to despair. I will scatter them as with an east wind. Again, the east wind is the Chinese or Asian slave trade. The Asian slave trade scattered you from the east to central, which was the African slave trade. The African slave trade divided us into 3 points, and that's the Arab slave trade, the European slave trade, and the American slave trade. Now, everybody's been seeing this. We're not calling it what it is. I just showed you a video of a teacher who they're trying to fire because he taught the truth. The man Lynch, who Virginia Lynchburg is named after, is famous because he tied up black loyalists to Britain, who they called Tories. So this is one of America's greatest secrets. So nobody wants to come out with this. You got to go all crazy on this one. From Tory British, and you add the word Negro, and then put Tories, and then you got to show results with Negro. That's what I hit, just to show you. I went down this. Nobody wants to connect Tories. Oh, there you go. Black Tories. Now, that's in the UK. That means today somebody know exactly what's going on, and they based out of the UK. It's right there for you. Now we're going to have to go further. Now we say, show me the results that have the word Negro in it. Now, appeal to religion, justice, humanity, inhabitants of the British Empire on behalf of the Negro slaves in the West Indies. So they arguing about the islands, right? Okay, so who was the British man who ended up in slavery? That don't make sense under, the way they teach slavery. British people going into slavery? Let's scroll down. First you get James Hunt, president of London Anthropology Society, 1863 on the Negroes. All right, so let's go further. And I already told you, black British people. So don't act like we ain't fine. Ignatius Sancho. You know that name? That's one of those black slave masters from Georgia. Okay? Yeah, we gonna leave that up. They took that video down. Tories of Connecticut. Well, Connecticut. In the case of the Negro calling himself James Cromwell, who fled his master, a Tory enemy at Long Island. So that's a Negro fleeing a Tory. The governor and so again, the Tory are the black British. So this Negro fled his master. So this Negro was a slave, and he fled his master, who was a Tory with a black British person. So technically, Lynch was hanging what? Ex-British soldiers and which happened to be Negroes. So you got Negro slaves, you got Negroes from Britain, you got a type of Negro from Africa, or if you just want to call them Africans, you can see how all this talk about black people was everywhere is right in front of our face. We just don't want to admit black people did this to us. Because why? For years, you've been siding behind black people, the same black people that enslaved us. We had Indian masters. We had black Tories as master. We had black Europeans, which is the same thing. We had black Africans. Nobody wants to put the connection between the French-speaking Africans and the Creole speakers, which would be what? French speakers. Original French speakers. Then they say the Jamaicans are really just a branch of Nigerians.
Boom. There it is. I was like, now it all makes sense. Now that makes sense. And you got to think of it too. Oh man, it makes sense.
Really? So they all the same. And this is when I started realizing they are right. This branch of Edom went into this group, so they look like this, and then they did this to us. This branch of Edom went into this group, and they look like this and did this to us. So all these groups, what is Psalms 83? Giving you multiple names of tribes of Edom for, and others, but multiple names of tribes of Edom. Take the time. Take one of the names that they give you and look it up. The abolition of the Negro slavery and British parliamentary.
So yeah, I like it's probably nothing to a lot of people, but to me that was gold because like I couldn't figure out the connection. Because we weren't finding the slave records. We weren't, at least on our dad's side, and like I said, that's my grandmother. My grandmother's family comes out of Jamaica, and they came to the Carolinas with their own slaves. And like I said, our cousins in Georgia are telling us, yeah, they still don't like the poor pews, the wealthy pews, the wealth black pews do not like the poor black pews, even to this day. So I mean, they know, and that's been the family I've been trying to get a hold of too, because but no one wants to respond or reply. I mean, and I've been writing family members everywhere. Like I've found out we got family in, Germany and over there in was it Costa Rica, and I'm like, they'll write me, but you won't, really. So that was incredible. And I've been working on some stuff because something happened. I've been working on some stuff about Rome because that part of the puzzles are starting to come together in my mind. That we're still under Roman occupation. I mean, I don't see it for long. It seems like it was funny. I'm watching the Jimmy Dore show, and they were talking about how America, and FEMA, they're the United States of FEMA. They're just giving away all this money to people coming in, and they're just giving it, like the Lindsey Graham, the senator of South Carolina, he was on the news. He's supposed to be talking about how bad South Carolina is and how bad it was hit. And the first thing he talks about is protecting their neighbors, that nation over there in the Middle East. You know what I'm talking about. But he's like, it's almost as if like a company is going out of business, and the people there are just ripping off the company, and they're just taking everything they want before they leave, before it changes ownership. I'm like, sounds so biblical. It sounds so biblical. But it also says to me, we better be ready because we know what's coming. We better be ready to go, because that's how I see it, But as I was saying, I've been working on some stuff about Rome because I wanted to do a video on it, and I wanted to do, to my best of my ability, I wanted to be done well. And I want to share some of the stuff I found that I thought was interesting here. But yeah, it took me back to Florida and Disney. Let me see. So here's an article: Disney invokes royal clause and new rules. Now this was what made me stop and think, all right? Because, and I've tried to find a video and I can't find it. I've tried for years now, but I was watching a video. These guys were basically, it was a YouTube channel that came up in my suggestions, and it was guys that were talking out against that Tammy Pepperman woman, right? And they're basically, showing that she's a fraud, and as they were going over that, I'm going through their other videos, and I found a video where they're talking to this guy from Florida, and he's telling you, Florida, like all of the 50 states, has a governor that we pay attention to, and a governor that we don't pay attention to. And the governor that we're not paying attention to is the one that handles the foreign affairs. He or she is the one that's actually running the country. And I talked to Vincent about it, and he broke it down to me, and it made sense, right? They're not the country, I'm sorry, they're running the states that they're in. So we have Ron DeSantis, he's the puppet, he's the president that they put out there and says, hey, he'll pass legislation, he'll pass policies, blame him if you don't like it, praise him if you like it. But then there's one behind the scene that is also elected, that I just can't remember the name of the title, because they all have them. They're not behind the scenes, but we just don't pay attention to them because we don't pay attention to politics the way we're supposed to. And I'll remember it. I'll remember the name because I know it's not the Attorney General, but it's someone else. But anyways, so I thought that was interesting because he's saying, yeah, this is the way the states are actually run, and he's like, the one from Florida goes over to, Europe and handles foreign affairs for Florida. I'm like, when have you ever, no, that was what Vince said. He's like, Vince said to me, Melvin, when have you ever heard foreign, the state of Florida, the state of New York, the state of Pennsylvania, or any of that stuff, having anything to do with foreign affairs? I'm like, you're right, I never have. But they're pointing out when we read their Wikipedia page, this is what they do. So I'm like, yeah, these people are going back and answering to their overmasters, their lords, their masters over there in Europe. That's crazy. So I thought about this, right? And how could they invoke a clause from England, right, to get Ron DeSantis and them to back off, right, and to play ball the way they wanted them to play ball? Let's see here.
In the dispute between Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Walt Disney Corp., a royal name has been invoked, and it isn't Prince Charming. In an effort to resist efforts by DeSantis to exert control over the park, Disney's current board passed an agreement that will dramatically limit the power of a new DeSantis-appointed board that also includes a reference to King Charles. Under the new agreement, Disney will not need the board to approve new projects or development rights. An agreement that will be in effect until 21 years after the death of the last survivor of the descendants of King Charles III, King of England, living as of the date of this declaration.
Let's see.
The feud between DeSantis and Disney began after Disney objected to controversial legislation that prohibits teaching about sexuality and gender identity in schools. DeSantis began efforts to exercise oversight of Orlando's Walt Disney World parks. The company has been exempt from oversight in areas including ride inspection as part of an agreement with the state. So why is an American park bringing the royal family into this dispute? The royal clause is used to sidestep rules that prevent contracts with no end date. The British royal family has traditionally been used as a reference because their family tree is public and, historically, their status meant they would live longer than the average person.
So it makes me wonder, can you use the same clause to sidestep being an indentured slave to the system? It's just something to think about. Like how did, what is the contract that they have that allows them to enslave us? We already know what it is. It all signs up when it all starts when you sign up for that social security number and then that birth certificate, right? Because those are the two things they push at you from birth. And then it says, hey, you're our property. You're playing by our rules. And I mean, I'm just interested because I'm interested because me, I like looking into treaties because, I mean, if the Constitution says that, hey, treaties are above the laws of the land, they're above everything here, then, it's good to know what the treaties are, to dig into them so you know how to use them. So this kind of stuff just piques my interest, but it made me start questioning this other stuff, because I'm talking to myself and thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, how in the world do they ever push that whole idea that children were, the property of the father, right? And I started looking through laws in England, and I know, this doesn't seem like it all fits in together, but I was looking through laws. I was like, England doesn't. They claim that they don't have a law like that. They claim that that's not their law, and I was like, so whose law was that? That the children were the property of the father. We see that idea with slavery, right? In slavery, they said the children were under the condition of the mother, right? I mean, they sometimes say the parents, but they mean the mother. If the mother was enslaved, then the children were born into slavery. So I was like, where does that come from? Because you can't find that in English law, at least the laws that they present. I haven't found it. And, you search for it and they say, no, that's not true. So I was like, whose laws then was the United States running by that said that this was so? And I found it. Let's see. Oh, you're not going to assist me on this one, are you? Mm-hmm.
Under Roman law, children were considered the property of the father, a concept known as patria potestas, which translates to power of the father. This meant the father had absolute control over his children, including their legal rights and property, essentially making them legally his possessions. Patria potestas, Latin, power of a father, in Roman family law, power that the male head of a family exercised over his children and his more remote descendants in the male line, whatever their age, as well as over those brought into the family by adoption. This power meant originally not only that he had control over the persons of his children, amounting even to a right to inflict capital punishment, but that he alone had any rights in private law. Thus, acquisitions of a child became the property of the father. The father might allow a child, as he might a slave, certain property to treat as his own, but in the eye of the law it continued to belong to the father. Patria potestas ceased normally only with the death of the father, but the father might voluntarily free the child by emancipation. And a daughter ceased to be under the father's potestas if upon her marriage she came under her husband's manus, q.v., a corresponding power of husband over wife. By classical times, the father's power of life and death had shrunk to that of light punishment, and sons could keep as their own what they earned as soldiers, peculium castrans. By Justinian's day, 527 to 565, the rules of peculium castrans were extended to many sorts of professional earnings, and in other acquisitions, such as property inherited from the mother, the father's rights were reduced to a life interest.
And there's more. I won't go into this one. I'll do a video just on this one alone because it's so long, and the robot's reading, so I don't mess anything up. So as you can see, it's just long. So I'll go into a separate one on this one then. But yeah, no, there it is. That now I understand that whole idea. Oh, the father, the children were his property. Slavery. I'm getting it. It's becoming clear. This is where it's coming from, Roman law. And then it's like, oh, that makes sense because didn't Rome come and sit on the throne of Britain? And remember who founded Britain. Esau come and taking everything, huh? So it goes back to Lexwill's video. Like, let's see if I can pull it up. Let's see.
The Roman conquest of Britain was the Roman Empire's conquest of most of the island of Britain, which was inhabited by the Celtic Britons. It began in earnest in AD 43 under Emperor Claudius. and was largely completed in the southern half of Britain, most of England and Wales, by AD 87, when the Staingate was established. The conquered territory became the Roman province of Britannia. Attempts to conquer northern Britain, Caledonia, in the following centuries were not successful. Following Julius Caesar's invasions of Britain in 54 BC, some southern British chiefdoms had become allies of the Romans. The exile of their ally Verica gave the Romans a pretext for invasion. The Roman army was recruited in Italia, Hispania, and Gaul and used the newly formed fleet classis Britannica. Under their general Aulus Plautius, the Romans pushed inland from the southeast, defeating the Britons in the Battle of the Medway. By AD 47, the Romans held the lands southeast of the Fosse Way. British resistance was led by the chieftain Caraticus until his defeat in AD 50. The Isle of Mona, a stronghold of the Druids, was attacked in AD 64. This was interrupted by an uprising led by Queen Boudica, 5, 6, 7, in which the Britons destroyed Camulodunum, 8, Verulamium, 9, and Londinium.
And just while I was on my mind here, we'll go and put this in there too. The Jack of the United States. The Jack of the United States refers to as the Union Jack by the U.S. Navy, is a maritime Jack flag flown on the bow of the U.S. vessels that are more marooned or anchored. And here's where I thought was interesting. This thing was adopted. There we go. Real quick.
The Union Jack was adopted on June 14, 1777, 1, alongside the U.S. national flag itself. 4. Since then, the Jack has essentially consisted of the canton of the national flag, with each star added to the national flag being added to the Union Jack also. 1. It is widely held that, before the Union Jack, the Jack of the United States was the first Navy Jack. 5. The exact historical appearance of this flag is disputed, but it is displayed today by the Navy bearing a rattlesnake and motto. 5. During the last several decades, the Union Jack has sometimes been temporarily removed from use, such as from 1975 to 1976. When the first Navy Jack was flown for the U.S. bicentennial, in 2000, when submarines and submarine tenders flew a special Jack for the 100th anniversary of the first commissioned U.S. Navy submarine. 6. And for all warships from 2002 to 2019, when the Navy flew the first Navy Jack for the global war on terrorism.
So yeah, I mean, to me, first of all, I have an issue. It's adopted. So again, this is not original to the United States, right? Just like the Constitution is not the original to the United States, and this founding fathers, they tell you they locked up some, Algonquin. They locked away some Algonquin Indians, right, in Massachusetts, right, and wouldn't let them go until they've understood how they had their constitution formatted, and basically wrote one that was basically from their perspective, using the Algonquins as a how would you say it? They used them as a guide. How did you guys write yours? Okay, this is how we're gonna write ours, right? And then, so here we go again. You have this Union Jack, which is to me saying, I mean, this is supposed to be the United States, right? This is supposed to be America, right? You won your independence from Britain. So why are you still flying their flag? Oh yeah, because if you read the Treaty of Paris, you actually find out, no, you were the losers in the war, because the King of England is dictating the terms, or not England, wow, the King of Britain is dictating the terms of the treaty. And no, I mean, you tell me, if you ever got into a fight, or a fist fight, you're not gonna get up and go around telling and this is witness, you're not gonna get around to go up and telling people, hey, I just whooped this person. Everyone's gonna be like, no, we seen it, you got whooped. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's still all being run by there. And as you see, their time is up, because it seems like everything is being moved to what we were taught to call like the Middle East. But to me, I look at it like old Greek, as was it like the Uzbekistan and stuff like that. The things are being moved there to set up for whoever the new rulers are, where they're going to be running things, and they're letting all these other places go to waste because they know what happens. I mean, what does the book of Leviticus say? Do not let your daughters become whores, right? What is the United States filled with? Was it My OnlyFans? You know what I'm saying? Watching these just videos of these women talking about, like, unless it's about money, why are they dating? Like, it's all been corrupted. Like, I mean, the pedophilia, it's all been corrupted, and they know what happens. They know the most highest ways. When it's been corrupted to this point, they know to get out of Dodge, because there is consequences for this. Now I want to share this last piece and then I'll stop.
Speech entitled African Slavery, the Cornerstone of the Southern Confederacy. In that speech, Stevens first correctly acknowledged that the Founding Fathers, even those from the South, had never intended for slavery to remain in America.
The prevailing ideas entertained by Thomas Jefferson and most of the leading statesmen at the time of the foundation of the old Constitution were that the enslavement of the African was in violation of the laws of nature. But the general opinion of the men of that day was that somehow or other, in the order of providence, the institution would be temporary and pass away.
So what did Vice President Stevens and the new Confederate nation think about these anti-slavery ideas of the Founding Fathers?
The founders' ideas against slavery were fundamentally wrong. They rested upon the assumption of the equality of races. This was an error, and the idea of a government built upon it. Our new government, the Confederate States of America, is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. That slavery, subordination to the superior white race, is the natural and moral condition of the Negro. This, our new Confederate government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth.
There was indeed a clear difference between the philosophy of the Republicans and of Democrats on the issue of race and racial equality. Southern Democrats had been willing to form an entire nation on the foundation of white supremacy. and there was no doubt that the South was strongly Democratic. As a leading South Carolina Democrat testified during an 1871 congressional hearing.
For the purposes of this hearing, sir, could you provide a breakdown along party lines as exists in your state? Almost 999 out of 1,000 of the decent people of South Carolina belong to the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is composed entirely of the colored people.
It was what?
When it came time for the presidential election of 1864, Southern Democrats were...
The Republican Party is composed entirely of the colored people.
When it came time for the presidential election of 1864, Southern Democrats were still fighting against the Union. Therefore, the presidential candidate for the Democrats that year was a Northern Democrat, Union General George B. McClellan. McClellan was actually running for president against his own commander-in-chief, but there was a clear difference between the two. In fact, Abraham Lincoln had twice replaced McClellan for failing to obey Lincoln's orders to launch a...
I don't know who that is that they're claiming is Abraham Lincoln. Because remember, he described himself as being, quote unquote, black. So I don't know who this guy in this picture is. I don't know where they even got these pictures.
Aggressive attacks against the Confederacy. General McClellan's pro-Southern sympathetic behavior was in direct contrast with that of other Northern military leaders. And not surprisingly, the anti-black tone of this Northern Democrat shone through in his presidential campaign. For example, examine this 1864 campaign piece for General McClellan. According to McClellan, since white lives were being lost, and since Republicans were seeking both abolition and Negro equality, McClellan argues that he, as a Democrat, should be elected so that he could halt those policies. Republicans also took clear positions in that 1864 presidential campaign. The 1864 Republican platform therefore called for a constitutional amendment to completely abolish slavery, and work was begun in Congress almost immediately on that amendment. That same year, President Lincoln won re-election to a second term. It was in 1865 that the Civil War finally came to a close. The nation of slaveholding states had been defeated. President Lincoln and the black troops of the 29th Connecticut Regiment visited Richmond, the former capital of the Confederate States of America. An officer in that black regiment recorded the scene.
As the president passed along the street, the colored people waved their handkerchiefs, hats, and bonnets and expressed their gratitude by shouting repeatedly, "Thank God for his goodness. We have seen his salvation." The white soldiers caught the sound and swelled the numbers, cheering as they marched along. All could see the president. He was so tall. One woman shouted, "Thank you, dear Jesus, for this sight of the great conqueror." No wonder tears came to the president's eyes when he looked on the poor colored people who were once slaves and heard the blessing uttered from thankful hearts and thanksgiving to God and Jesus. Thousands of colored men in Richmond would have laid down their lives for President Lincoln.
By the way, in these accounts and hundreds of others, the strong Christian faith of black Americans is apparent. That faith is as active today as it ever was. For a number of recent polls show that Christian beliefs are higher among African Americans than among any other group in the country. Returning to 1865, there were numerous celebrations by black Americans and others at the end of the Civil War, but even before the war had come to an end, a vote had been held in Congress on the constitutional amendment to abolish slavery, the 13th Amendment. Congress passed that amendment, and this poster was quickly issued to honor the 137 members of Congress who had voted to abolish slavery. At the time of that vote, there were 118 Republicans in Congress and 82 Northern Democrats. Of the 118 Republicans, all 118 voted to abolish slavery. However, of the 82 Democrats, only 19 voted to end slavery. Only 23% of Democrats, and these were the Northern Democrats. When the vote had been taken in Congress on the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, the chambers had been packed from wall to wall with expectant observers. When the numbers were counted, and it was announced that the amendment had passed, a roar erupted from the thousands in the chamber. Hats were thrown and voices were raised in exuberant cheers. Congress had voted to end slavery. How Why should something that profound be celebrated? Members of the House asked that a sermon be preached to commemorate the event. And whom did they ask to preach the sermon?
Here we go. This is what I wanted you to see. This is what I wanted you to see. But I wanted to add that something about slavery and the Democrats, because a lot of stuff is, I don't know what you would call it, being memory hold. You know, take the word, the N-word, for instance. Years ago, we were able to access it on the real definition on the Oxford English Dictionary website. Now you can't see it anymore. So now when you want to, you know, show somebody the real definition, right, you can't pull it up anymore. Whoa, why? Why hide it? You know, I still think it's because of that connection that it has back to, like, was it, and then there were 9? And that illustration, because there's that illustration, and then there were 9, they were like, you got to see it to know what I'm talking about. The way they were dressed. They weren't dressed as slaves from Africa and rags. They were dressed in, you know, party clothes, you know, and you know, red shirts, you know. And then you look up, what's it called, the wigs, the wig dolls, and they're dressed the same way. A little girl in a red polka dotted dress, a young boy with a red fancy coat and striped red and white pants, you know, and just like those people in that illustration. And it's like, there's a connection there that even with the Oxford English Dictionary, we're not catching, and they don't want us to make that connection. So that's why they took it down. And now you can't see it no more. And they're doing the same thing with Democrats. Oh, the Klan and Democrats have no connection. Well, I distinctly remember there's a connection between those two. You know, and that the Klan did the bidding of the Democrats. So that's why I wanted to put that in there, because, like I said, that stuff's being memory held. But this is what I wanted to get to.
The Reverend Henry Highland Garnett. Garnett became the first African American to speak.
Listen to what's said. Listen to what's said. Because this is what put me on the, I just started looking into Rome again.
In the halls of Congress, and he preached this sermon on Sunday, February the 12th, 1865, and it was powerful. He began that sermon with a recollection of his own personal experiences.
What is slavery? Too well do I know what it is. I was born among the cherished institutions of slavery. My earliest recollection of parents, friends, and the home of my childhood are clouded with its wrongs. The first sight that met my eyes was my Christian mother enslaved.
Garnett then reviewed the prominent historical leaders of both church and state who had strongly opposed slavery.
The other day, when the light of liberty streamed through this marble building and the hearts of a noble band of patriotic statesmen leaped for joy, and this, our national capital, shook from foundation to dome with the shouts of a ransomed people. Then methinks the spirits of Washington, Jefferson, the Jays, the Adams, and Franklin, and Lafayette, Giddings, and Lovejoy, and those of all the mighty and glorious dead remembered by history because they were faithful to truth, justice, and liberty, were hovering over this august assembly. The unseen by
I got 5 and 11. Sorry about that. I didn't know it was still recording. What I'm sorry. What I wanted to pause, I was hoping to pause it and get back to it. What I was hoping you would catch is that he claims that they were in the assembly of Augustus. Okay?
of all the mighty and glorious dead remembered by history because they were faithful to truth, justice, and liberty, were hovering over this august assembly. Doubtless they joined the angelic choir and liberty, were hovering over this august assembly.
See, Augustus Assembly. I was like, wait a minute. Why would this preacher refer to the Union of the United States as the assembly of Augustus? So I reached out to Arthur, and Arthur's like, hey, what was Augustus famous for? So that's where I was stumped, because I've been looking into it and I don't see anything that pops out that was of worth. Like, I mean, the accomplishments are not there like I was expecting, like Julius Caesar's. So yeah, I'm convinced that we're still under the rule of Britain, and Britain, how was you saying? Britain is under the thumb of Rome. And it could be the original Romans, which I'm, and that's what I'm seeing is going on. Because why else would you name a lot of these states that give their mottos, mottos that are in Latin, right? And just so much of the connection back to Rome is here, just in like the laws and the language. So that's what I think is going on. But I wanted to share that. I thought that was pretty incredible.